Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're just going to allow a couple minutes for other participants to join. We will commence the webinar at 3:05. Afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, as we have what we believe will be an insightful training provided by Show Racism, the Red Card, in conjunction with the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. This training is provided today as part of the Program of Action for Anti-Racism Week. And what Anti-Racism Week is all about is basically it's an action week celebrated between the 14th to the 21st of March and culminates on Human Rights Day and the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. This action week, we hope, aims to create public awareness about racism and its effects on individuals and broader society. And it's about ensuring that there's a countrywide focus on tackling racism. This year's Anti-Racism Week is celebrated under the theme of Learn, Speak, Act, Combating Racism Together. We hope that South Africans are able to learn about racism so that we can speak out against it and act against it in instances where we are confronted with racism. Thank you to Show Racism the Red Card for offering today's training. Just a bit about them. Show Racism the Red Card is the United Kingdom's leading anti-racism educational charity, and it has been in existence since 1996. Show Racism the Red Card educates young people and adults all across the United Kingdom and produces educational resources and platforms that help challenge misconceptions, stereotypes, and negative attitudes in society. So keeping in line with this year's Anti-Racism Week and theme, we hope that by offering this training to educators across the country, we are able to offer the tools, resources, and advice in ensuring that we create learning environments that are diverse, inclusive, and representative of all. So thank you once again to Show Racism the Red Card for offering and agreeing to offer this training rather. I'd just like to introduce the trainer of this session, Ms. Fiona Clark. Over to you.
Hello, everybody. Hi. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction as well. That is so warm and welcoming. Thank you. It's lovely to be here with you this afternoon. Thank you for having me. And I'm really looking forward to spending the next sort of hour and a half just kind of having really a discussion style training. So please, if there's any point at which you want to ask a question, if you feel comfortable, pop that in the chat box, or if you want to just kind of call out, that's fine. It's a really informal session. So please just jump in at any point. Don't feel as if you've got to wait for, you know, a particular pause in the proceedings. Okay, so I am going to share my screen and we will get started and work out what it is that we are going to be looking at this afternoon. Okay, so all right, so first of all, huge welcome. And thank you for the introduction about Red Card. That was absolutely spot on. We do a whole range of training as well. We do school workshops for the learners and for the educators. We do adult training and events, competitions, and we do have a lot of social media. If you want to follow us on any of the social media platforms, you'll find us at Show Racism the Red Card. So it'd be great to have you on board for that. Okay, so this is our team. I think there's about 50 of us now. This was us a couple of years ago. And we are growing just due really to the demand of the amount of people who are after all of the different learning. Okay, I will share these PowerPoints after. We had a question. Is it Widad? Is that right? I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If not, please tell me. So we will have all of these PowerPoints. I will share them and you'll be able to keep them and look through them afterwards. So please don't feel you've got to take anything down from the PowerPoints. Okay, so no problem. Okay, so this is a shared space. It's a safe space this afternoon. And certainly what we're thinking is this afternoon, we are talking about possibly some sensitive things. We possibly be talking about things which might, you know, be triggering. If at any point you feel as if you would like to take a break, please just do that. You don't have to kind of let me know, just as long as you're okay. And, you know, it's just important that everybody feels, you know, that we are kind of respectful towards each other. As we go through our session. Okay, so please let me know if there's anything that's, you know, that you want to raise that we kind of haven't spoken about as well, because we can always come back and do a little bit more as well. Okay, right. So today's session, first of all, we're going to have a look at unconscious bias. Second, we're going to look at inclusivity and how we kind of might create an inclusive classroom. Third, we are going to look at how we might recognize racism and what we do if we need to report it. And finally, I'm going to share with you all of our free resources, which are all ready-made lessons that you can use with your learners. And it's on our online platform, which is free to everybody. It's called the Education Hub. It would help anybody to continue on with their anti-racism journey, and it would be useful. It's not a platform for students to go to. It's a platform for teachers to go to or educators to go to in order for you to pick out what would be appropriate for your learners. Okay, so I'll share that with you at the end. Okay, so what is unconscious bias? All right, so first of all, we need to think about the fact that it's not something we have control over. So if anybody ever offers you training to get rid of your unconscious bias, please don't take it up, because we can't get rid of our unconscious bias. These are things which we have grown up with, experiences that form our worldview, and they are social stereotypes that automatically happen outside of our conscious awareness, triggered by our brain. Our brains are really clever. They fill in the gaps. And we do make assessments of people and situations without even realizing it. It's all happening, you know, subconsciously. So in terms of types of unconscious bias, there are lots of different types. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to give you an example, if we look at these four here, so we have got affinity bias. So if you feel a connection to somebody who might be similar to you, so if, for example, I did like a poll between us this afternoon and I said, anybody who prefers cats or anybody who prefers dogs, you know, we potentially could end up with two groups of people who would feel that, oh, these people like cats the same as me. That's an affinity. It's something that's the same. I was doing a session the other day in a library, and there was a couple of people wearing dungarees, like an overall sort of outfit, and I was wearing it too. And we were talking about affinity bias, and they said when they came in, they immediately thought, oh, this is going to be good because she's wearing dungarees the same as me, which sounds bizarre, but we do subconsciously, without even meaning to, feel a connection with those similar to us. And I suppose that's kind of a natural thing to do. Okay, next one, I just want to have a brief look at perception bias. And again, this might be things that we've already got preconceived ideas, and we might have assumptions about certain groups. And I think it's about being just aware that not all people who are part of a certain group, you know, might be exactly the same, but they might have their own individual idiosyncrasies, and they might have their own individual personalities. You know, everybody is an individual person, even if they are part of a group. So yeah, just if somebody was part of a culture or religion, we mustn't assume that everything about those people in that group is uniform. Okay. All right. So the next one, let's have a look, is halo effect. All right. So if sometimes we project positive qualities onto people without actually knowing them, what we do is sometimes it might be somebody we might have seen in the media, or if somebody is a football or a sports fan, they might actually, for example, kind of almost have like a glow or an angel kind of halo around that person, as if they kind of, you know, that person can do no wrong. It might be a pop idol or somebody in the music world. It could be, you know, somebody we've not actually met before, but we kind of project positive qualities, and it's like, well, they can do no wrong. That's not something, you know, that they're kind of like perfect in your eyes. Sometimes happens with parents and children, where parents sometimes, occasionally, it can happen with the parent and the child, where the parent just thinks that the child can never do anything wrong. So yeah, it can happen occasionally like that. And finally, this one I wanted to look at, confirmation bias. So looking to confirm our own opinions and pre-existing ideas. Now, our brain does this really in a bizarre sort of way, which if we have this fixed notion or fixed idea, our brain looks for things that confirm that. So our brain will look for ways that kind of we tell it that it's right. So yeah, it's a very again subconscious thing that happens. Let's have a little bit of a delve into why this happens. Just looking at these symbols here, I'm sure lots of you will recognize these symbols either from like a phone messaging system. We've got music we might listen to, travel we maybe have done, where we live, anything that is internet related, whether it's social media, emails, you know, the time that we spend outside or inside of our kind of professional lives, everything in our lives and since we've grown up, you know, has influenced our worldview, and everybody's worldview is different. Media is a huge one. These are British newspapers here, but I'm sure that if we were to gather some, you know, newspapers, you know, from South Africa, I'm sure we would be able to see, you know, that there is definitely some papers maybe lean towards a certain viewpoint. And we have to, suppose, remember that at one point, many years ago, newspapers used to report the news, like that was their purpose. And I think possibly the role of newspapers or some newspapers seems to have changed, and it's not necessarily to report the news as facts, but they almost seem to exist, some of these ones certainly, to persuade you of a certain way of thinking. And people, I don't think everybody has quite kind of cottoned on to that. I know there are people in my family who read these newspapers and then they'll repeat the information in them, and I'll say, well, where have you heard that from? And they'll say, well, I read it in the newspaper. So for them, it's like that's it. It's absolutely true. Well, it's in the newspaper. They wouldn't be allowed to print it if it wasn't true. But unfortunately, I certainly know that in the UK press, people have been found out to have been making up stories. It is in almost selling paper exercise now, newspapers. It's kind of like, what can we print that will sell? And it's been under the microscope and under investigation quite a few times in the UK for having, you know, been very unscrupulous and, you know, not at all decent or moral in the way that they go about collecting stories sometimes. So we have to be careful, I think. And when we hear a story, we just need to think, where's the source? Where has it come from? So that it doesn't affect our unconscious bias in that powerful way. Okay, so that is really kind of at the moment unconscious bias. We can come back to that if people have questions about it, but all we can do around unconscious bias is be aware of these things that we've just mentioned. So if we just imagine we meet somebody who's from a particular group, let's say we meet somebody who we discover is, I don't know, let's say Muslim. What we have to do to challenge our unconscious bias is just take a beat, take a breath, and maybe ask more questions than assume things about that person. Because yes, that person might belong to a particular group or culture or religion, or they might have a certain nationality. But I think that what we need to remember is people are individuals. And in order to challenge ourselves, challenge our unconscious bias, we have to learn to understand the individual rather than just assuming. Because I think unconscious bias is where our brains fill in the gaps. Our brains are really clever. They do this automatically, our brains, in order to be really efficient. And to be honest, it sounds like a really kind of useful thing to have sometimes, you know, a really good, efficient brain. But the truth is that it can sometimes lead us to make assumptions about somebody when really we probably need to ask questions. People are not offended by questions about, you know, generally asking them about their individual kind of circumstances, their culture, if it's in the right context, in the professional capacity that you're working in. People, especially if you're working with students in the classroom, you know, they want you to invest time and information and knowledge and, you know, to them to get to know them. And that makes your classroom a better place, doesn't it? Okay, so let's move on to inclusive practice. Any questions at the moment? I'm just jumping ahead here, but please just jump in if anybody has a question. All good? Okay, right. Super. So we have to think about what we need to do in order to be inclusive, in order to tackle prejudice and promote equality. So there's three things that we can do. First of all, in your organization, it would be, you know, the most kind of important fundamental starting point to embed equality into the policies and practices. And that's something which you would do as an organization. And we can help with that as well. So please reach out if there's any ways in which you would like support with something like that. We, as people, need to be able to recognise and respond when we see a prejudicial incident, when we see racism. So that's something we're going to talk about today. And doing what we're doing now is this third one: educate staff and learners against prejudice to reduce the reoccurrence of incidents, and create an environment where everyone feels safe. Okay. All right. So a couple of ideas, which before we kind of delve a little bit more into inclusivity, a couple of ideas. If we think about it, we see probably lots of students every day, and we know that we'd like to know them all really well. But sometimes it can be just a very brief conversation about a hobby they do outside of school, or, you know, something they might be celebrating at home that might be part of their culture. And just having that time, I suppose it could be an actual verbal conversation, or it could actually be, for example, a piece of work that you set them, which you know, ask them to describe something, you know, that they've done recently with their families or with their communities. And then you receive those pieces of work and you kind of get to know. It's quite surprising sometimes the things that students are doing outside of schools, which are really interesting. And they never tell you. They're kind of like, oh my goodness, you've been doing all these amazing things. But getting to know your students definitely helps you to build those authentic relationships. And if you have students who are aware that you're investing in them, they in turn will invest in their learning, and obviously the outcomes are better in that regard for everybody. Another really good one, and this is really kind of starting to become on the radar of teachers in the UK, but it's still just kind of becoming I suppose prevalent, and it's not something that is complete at all by any means. It's a journey that we're on as educators. So this is including in your curriculum a variety of learning materials and activities. Now, for many years, I would say the UK curriculum did not represent, whether it be in English literature or when history, you know, the range of different cultures and communities that are, you know, out there. And it meant that when our students left school, they had studied lots of English literature texts that were by white male classical kind of authors or playwrights or poets, but they hadn't studied, say, many female authors or Black authors, or, you know, of lots of different cultures that are available to study and read. We are in the process, and I think it's really important to do this, to reflect a diverse range of racial, cultural, socioeconomic, religious and gender identities, in order to make your classroom an inclusive place. In terms of history, we had a conversation with somebody yesterday, actually, which was all around the things that we'd studied for history at school. And the person I was talking to, the colleague, was actually in Wales, and he said he had studied far more probably useful things than I had. So he had studied World War One, he'd studied apartheid, he had studied World War Two. I had studied the Tudors and Henry VIII, etc., etc. And while that's really important, I just thought maybe what he had studied had been a bit more useful. I don't know how representative it was, and in terms of, I think that it is obviously got to be defined by people from the communities in terms of to understand, are we representing these histories correctly? I've just spotted a question there. Curriculum determined by government who are refusing to create this inclusive culture. It's still so strong in the UK. Studying Shakespeare means nothing. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. What do we do about that? Have we got any suggestions about if because our curriculum, I'll just stop sharing for a minute. Our curriculum in the UK is determined by the government too. And we do have to still do a Shakespeare play. We still do have to do a pre-1914 text, which can be hard to find, say, a female author, for example, in that regard, although there are some, but obviously it's a massively male kind of dominated choice sometimes. If we have got a determined curriculum whereby we've got children who are going to be examined on certain texts by the end of it, what can we do to make sure that we do have that exposure to other cultures in literature? Is there anything anybody's found they can do? Anybody got any suggestions? Oh, Eleanor, thanks.
Hi. I mean, it's not a world-shattering idea, but there are two things. Firstly, the younger classes are often offer that opportunity, so that's quite fun. And so we really have only the prescribed texts are really only for the exterior exams, the matric and things. So there is that possibility. And I think also shorter texts. So just, a paragraph or the opening paragraph of this novel or something, even, as you are going to be teaching your other novel. I'm an English teacher, so maybe that helps. That can help. And it really is worth it. For English teachers, there's somebody called Kwame Alexander who writes about kids who play basketball, and it reaches boys, it reaches sport is crazy kids. He's a black guy, his hero is black, so it ticks a lot of boxes, and the kids appreciate it, and it's worth it when one does. Thanks.
Absolutely. It sounds very worthwhile. Would you mind popping, was that an author's name, the Kwame Alexander?
Yeah.
Would you mind popping that in the chat just so everybody's got a little bit of a reference point there? Because that sounds really useful. And I think that when we get recommendations from each other like this, we can just find something that's instantly usable. We can kind of go, right, I can go to that and we can have a look at it and work out if that's something our children would be interested in. So thank you enormously for that, Eleanor. I've just noticed as well that Dad says, Dad, am I pronouncing your name correctly, first of all?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So Dad has said that that I do introduce poetry, my own choice, to ensure that it's more relevant to the student community. That's excellent, So as we were just saying there, if it's an opening and you kind of give somebody a little taste of something in terms of whetting their appetite for what might be possible. I don't know if you have a system where you could have books that they lend that they could take home to borrow, which might be extracurricular books, which are kind of like extra to what they are studying. Maybe recommended book lists. So that with kind of like in fact, I've got a book list which I could send send you, and then, you know, it's kind of a really, it's got some adult recommendations on it, but it's also got like some children's recommendations too. And there might just be some things in there which you kind of think, well, that might be worth sharing the list, you know, with your students and families. Because yeah, it's about just using those little opportunities. And maybe there are days in the calendar where there are certain things being celebrated, like International Women's Day, or, you know, and you decide to introduce a female Black author, and you kind of say, right, this is the opportunity, you know, to be able to do that and celebrate and honor. So I definitely think, and it's fine being honest as well and saying, look, I know that we have this curriculum that we have to study, but please be aware that there are so many more, you know, cultures that we can read about, and ethnicities that we can, because I think what can be really upsetting for learners is that if they are only ever reading about people who they don't really see themselves in the literature, you know, imagine, I think that possibly would be so empowering if they did, if they were studying, if they were being examined on, you know, literature that actually was representing them and their cultures, because it's kind of like writing about something completely different, every single time you study a book, isn't it? So that's really interesting. Oh, Eleanor, thank you. So Eleanor's put in the chat there, Kwame Alexander, and then there's some information. Are they titles of Sonnet If We Must Die By? Oh, is that something? Is that another one as well? Is that a book, or is that a poem?
It's just a sonnet. Yeah.
Lovely. Well, that's short enough just to access in a short space of time, isn't it? If We Must Die by Claude Mackay. Is it Claude Mackay or Mackay? It depends where you're from, doesn't it? Where you say
I think.
Black American Poet. Brilliant. Thank you. I'll definitely be making a note of that. If anybody else wants to make a note of that, then please do. Wonderful. Thank you. Right. Thank you, everyone. Right. So let's go back to where we were before. Okay. Right, so encourage interaction among students as well. So you're going to invest in them and really build authentic relationships, understand individuals rather than just understanding that they might be from a certain culture. And you know, if you encourage interaction amongst the students, you are definitely gonna kind of help build their relationships, and your classroom's obviously going to be a happier place. So things that you probably do at the start of the year, like playing icebreaker games, help students get to know each other, switching seats around several times throughout the year, because they will gravitate towards people they know a lot of the time. So it does open up their understanding of each other, which I think is because they're going to be the kind of ones leading the next generation. We need to be able to foster this idea that we don't just kind of have this affinity bias where we always magnetize to people who are like us, but that we can, you know, build relationships and friendships with people who, you know, are not just exactly the same as us. And it certainly brings kind of broadening to the mind, doesn't it? I think that's why they say travel broadens the mind as well, isn't it? It's the same sort of concept. Okay, so why should we, as an organization, move towards inclusivity? You know, why do that? And there are a number of reasons for that. Apart from the fact that it's kind of just a good human, you know, thing to do. Improved outcomes. So if your classroom is a place where children feel valued and that they're seen and that people understand who they are, and you know they've got genuine, authentic relationships with the teacher and with each other, the learning is going to be more successful, and then the outcomes will be more successful in whatever shape that is, whether it's an assessment, an exam, etc. If we're kind of being really kind of clear about it, we want everybody to succeed. So this is one of the things that will help that to actually happen. So I think in terms of, you know, senior leadership teams, pushing inclusivity, etc., and convincing, you know, any senior leadership teams to improve inclusivity, it does improve that bottom line of that of those exam results. Improve relationships, which is just generally a kind of better world to live in, where we have better quality of interactions. Improved individual satisfaction, so that's for the teacher and for the learner. You know, everybody wins when we feel as if we are all working together rather than just in silos. Better use of resources. I think if we understand our pupils more and we understand them better, we can not only tailor things and, you know, the learning to them, but we can also connect people when we understand, say, something about a student. You know, they might be able to help somebody. Maybe there's another language spoken and you realize that two students can help each other, you know, with language. It might be somebody new comes to the school who, you know, doesn't necessarily access English for the education, but there might be somebody who speaks their mother tongue, and therefore, you know, there's all sorts of ways, you know, that we can, you know, help each other, and that's a really good way to be inclusive. It definitely builds trust and mutual respect, and it allows, you know, educators to do their job properly as well and effectively. Okay, so I'll just let you read that slide. Please use this as an opportunity as well if there's anything you want to ask at this point. Okay. Right, what I'm going to do at this point, if it's okay with you, is I am going to ask you, I'm going to put you into some breakout rooms, okay? And I'm going to give you a focus. I'll just share this now. So the focus is discuss a time when you have seen or experienced a cultural barrier, okay, in your classroom. So any of the things that we've just spoken about, you know, it could be language, it could be a cultural thing, anything at all which you kind of think that has been an issue and you've seen it, you know, in practice. I'm just going to give you about 6 minutes. If you want to take a screenshot of that so that you've got it, or if you want to take a photograph on your phone, then you've got that question there. So I'll stop sharing that, and in about 6 minutes we'll come back and we will have a discussion about what the things. Oh, Lorato, sorry, you've got your hand up. Beg your pardon, sorry.
Afternoon, everyone.
Sorry, I missed that. What was that?
Afternoon, am I audible enough?
Yeah, that's it. I can hear you now.
Okay, awesome stuff. Thank you so much for all that you've presented and prepared thus far. It's really informative. So just a quick one, and this is a question that I've actually asked a few people, or even I myself tried to see what solution could be there, or how does one prevent, or how does one cure this, in a sense of, in a classroom, for example, just take it to primary phase or primary school. And as much as there's so much, you know, like initiatives, activities, and even the curriculums that are present to just try and put in including everyone in terms of maybe games or the extramural activities that they do and everything. And teachers and educators, they are doing a great job.
Yeah.
However, the question now then is, how can we then break those certain barriers whereby now children from where they stay or the things they do outside the school premises then affects them? So, well, in terms of now the racism or the discrimination, whereby now you get a child who is brought or taught up in a very, maybe brought up in a very abusive environment, or is from a broken home, or does not know the love of a father or a mother or parents or an elderly person, and they come into the learning environment and bring that. So already they are an outcast themselves within everyone. And here you are as a teacher, or the curriculum says breakout in groups, share, do this, do that. How can we, I don't know, prevent that? Or how do we deal with such a situation where now you've been trying and you've been winning with half of the class, but there's this other individuals that are just not going to be included?
Yes.
Thanks.
That is a fantastic question. Thank you for sharing that kind of background to it as well, because that's a really common issue, I think, more now than ever possibly before. As teachers, we are not just teaching our subjects, we are having a real consciousness, a real awareness of what's been happening, you know, at home for that person, for that child, and really how quite sort of psychological trauma or impact that might have. And I've got no doubt that you probably kind of have had experience of, you know, adverse childhood experiences in training and things like that. If not, there's definitely some links I could send to people which are specifically for helping children who have had what we call adverse childhood experiences, and it can involve a whole range of things that might have happened, as you say, Lorado, all those different things that you mentioned. It could be a missing parent, or, you know, a broken family, or there could be all kinds of different traumas which have happened to a child, and I could send you some links about those. I can give you just a brief example of what in my experience I've done when I've had a child who has had an adverse childhood experience, and it's been to, yes, we've been doing whatever we're doing and that child's been part of that learning, but I created a calm box for one of the children that I was teaching, and it was full of things which regulated his behavior, because he would become very dysregulated very easily. And by that, I mean, if he was at all coming in triggered by something that had happened that night before, or that morning, or that week, and he was misbehaving, he couldn't concentrate, he couldn't focus, and I'm trying to create an inclusive classroom. And remember, we can do our best to create inclusive classrooms, but what we can never be in control over is how children will come into our classrooms and what kind of like frame of mind they're going to be in, because that is just not something we'll ever have control over. Certainly, I worked with a specialist, a childhood trauma specialist. I was fortunate enough. I'll put her name in the chat actually, because you can look her up, and she has got lots of materials which are just online. So she's actually trained as like a play therapist, and I think some schools are fortunate to have play therapists. I've never had a play therapist working alongside me before, but sorry, I put Louisa. It's not Louisa, it's Louise. Sorry, forgive me. So Louise Bomber is a child play therapist and a psychologist, and she has developed a number of strategies for exactly these types of situation where you really want to support a child and be inclusive. But for that child that I was describing, we were still doing the learning and that child was still in the classroom, but that child was, and it was on an understanding that we had, the two of us, when he needed to, he could go over to his calm box, and those things in there, in that calm box, would help to regulate him, and he would then start to possibly have the capacity to be able to engage in what we were saying, what we were talking about. Because, you know, when a child's had a trauma or they're experiencing difficulties, they don't listen, they don't learn, they can't. They're absolutely at saturation point with what they're trying to cope with. So anything beyond survival at that point for the child is, you know, I don't need to learn that. I need to be able to cope with these things that have happened to me. And calm boxes are different for everybody. So it might be that there might be like a little plushy toy in there, or it might be like one of those fidget toys, or, you know, it could be like a little bit of blue tack or a plasticine. like, you know, those stress balls, or it might be a bit of Lego or whatever you know, it has to be kind of, I know classrooms that do have calm boxes for the children. There's just one calm box for all the children, but it really is most effective when it is made for the child. So yes, it's certainly one option, and I think that the school would be best placed as an organization to understand how that child needs to be supported, rather than the kind of responsibility lying entirely with you to kind of come up with your own solutions and your own strategy. Because if that child is going from one member of staff to another member of staff, the consistency would be good for the child if what we have got works. If we have strategies to help that child to cope with the day at school, then we need to kind of all have that communication between us, don't we? So it would certainly be something as a staff that you would probably want to have a chat about and say, right, we've got child X, they really are struggling with this. What can we do collectively to help that child? Obviously, that person would need somebody to go to, and they would have to know who that named member of staff was if they wanted to, you know, if they were having a moment or a timeout and they needed to just, you know, get away from a classroom, then they have to have a safe space to go. So yes, I think that's certainly a really good question. Does that go part way at all, Lorato? Am I saying your name correctly as well?
Correct. And thank you for sharing that. It's beautiful. I just shared on the chat. I think
Oh yes.
adults need it. Now you're describing it, I'm thinking, okay, I should also have a calm box just to be calm and
Oh
have things that
wow.
are there.
Yeah.
But 100%, it does make a lot of sense. And I mean, children are children, they would love it, especially if their Legos or a favorite treat of theirs is there. It just brings a brighter side to life
Yeah.
and makes and distracts them from their trauma experience. I'll definitely share this with all my educator friends. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. I will send over some of the Louise Bomber links as well, because she has got like a whole website full of ideas where you can just access those, you know, online for free. And there's some great ideas. Really, really good. I just pinch all these ideas from other people. These are not my ideas, but thank you. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So, Beth has put a question in the chat, and thank you for your Beth has said I can share this, so I'll read this out. I will just use the N word rather than reading out the actual word, if that's okay. Hi Fiona, I had an incident of at school today where a learner came out of class and said the word N. Most of the class heard him and were very concerned. Initially, I had to find out who said it. The learner was very embarrassed, but said that the geography teacher had spoken about Niger, and so he was just saying Niger incorrectly. We get this a lot, yeah. I explained to him that it wasn't a good thing to say. However, I think I could have handled it better. So often you have a knee-jerk reaction. Yeah, how would be a better way to handle it? I think sometimes the learners are trying out a word. I'm not justifying this behavior, just curious that there's definitely a better way to handle it. And so I encourage the inclusivity. Yes. I think that is a really kind of common, I've seen, and you probably have too, children doing this a lot because they want to test things out and they want to push the boundaries and they want to understand that they might try and get away with something by addressing it as something else. I don't know the age of the child, but it sounds as if they are old enough to understand that they were
10 years old, Fiona.
10, right? Thank
10,
you, Beth.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think at 10, certainly in the UK, we say to children at 10, you are now culpable for like, you know, lawful things like lawful and unlawful things. So in the UK, we say to 10-year-olds, it's not okay from now on. You really need to understand that because racism in the UK is illegal, we can't have somebody saying, "Oh, it was a joke," or I wasn't doing that. I was saying, you know, they're old enough at that age to understand that what they were doing there was, yes, they were pretending, I suppose, that it was just, oh, well, I wasn't talking about that, I was talking about Niger. But we know, and I think sometimes we say that to students, don't we? Look, we know that you're saying that, but we know the real truth. Pretend, we understand that you were trying to cover your tracks, as it were. But I think that it's a conversation. I think you've handled it really well, to be honest. I think it's a conversation where you say you are at a point now in your life where this is not going to wash anymore. You have to understand that you can't get away with just saying, oh, I got confused. I was saying that is not from now on at your age gonna let you off with anything. Younger kids, you let off with things because you have to think maybe they have got, a reduced understanding, at that age, a younger age. But at 10, I would definitely say, without a doubt, and I suppose it's down to your individual understanding of the child as well, whether or not you think that they might have a punishment. Because I think personally, if that had been me, if I thought it was appropriate and for that child, then I would definitely have said, you are going to have a punishment, because there is not going to be a let off for this, even if it's just something tokenistic where you kind of go, you're going to remember that this is not, because if you think that's something which you can get confused, I'm going to make it a point that you need to remember going forward. You can't keep making that mistake. But you see, as educators, we don't just teach subjects, do we? We teach, social intelligence, and I often think when you get to like 10, 11, 12, they've learned how to, tie their shoelaces and toilet themselves, and they can feed themselves and dress themselves. But I think at this age, 10, 11, 12, etc., they're like social newborns. So it's very much they are on a learning curve. They're very savvy a lot of the time, though, and they're testing things out. And I think it's down to us to say, hang on a minute, whoa, 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 just stop there. And we do that all the time, don't we? So yeah, that's a really good example. Thank you so much for sharing that, Beth. I really appreciate it. Oh, Beth, you've got your hand up as well. Do you want to have a little?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I asked him to apologize to the class, and he did apologize. And then quite a few of the kids said, that's okay. And then I turned around and said, but that's not okay.
Good.
But I think the kids, they were quite genuine when they said, like, it's fine, we'll, kind of like, we'll forgive you. But I tried to make it clear that it wasn't okay. But, they're little, the 10-year-olds, well, our 10-year-olds are actually quite little, really.
Yeah.
They're from quite sheltered backgrounds, as opposed to, say, in England, maybe being from an inner city area. They're
Right.
very sheltered. And definitely the young gentleman was very embarrassed.
Right.
But at least it became a learning exercise for the class, really.
So the young gentleman who was embarrassed, is that the one who had
You used the word, yeah.
used the word,
Yeah.
right? Well, I think the point's been made then. You've definitely described
Yeah.
there. I think the point's been made, and
Yeah.
and I think because you asked him to apologize, that's going to stick in people's minds. And I think that, and you've got an opportunity, if it did happen again, you've now got somewhere to go with that. If you kind of thought, right, he's done it again, this is just, it's not going in this, we need to have a bit more of a, conversation about this, or some, time out or whatever. But yeah, I think you've handled that really well, Beth, and you've called it out, and you've called it out for what it is, which I think is really important, because as busy teachers, it is really tempting. I have to put my hands up. If we are busy and we are, we haven't been to the toilet all day, we haven't had a cup of tea or a drink or anything all day, it's really tempting just to go, oh, do you know what? Just go and play and stop, telling tales or whatever. But for you to take that time to do that is really, really powerful. And I think you've done exactly the right thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell another thing that's happening at our school is a lot of body shaming. Like,
right.
you're a different color black to me, so you must be different. And you have a big bottom. So this constant, body shaming, but not related to just the way you look, but the race that you are, you know.
I think that's racism. I think
Yeah,
that is
no,
racism.
no,
Yeah,
it is, but it's
yeah.
obviously a difficult one. But yeah, for sure it's racism, but it's always difficult. Yeah, and that's why I'm in the seminar, to just find out how does one
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
approach it. But that's
I've got
great.
some, yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate you adding that in. That's really useful because I've got some things coming up, which are about recognizing and responding. So we will definitely have a bit closer look at that. So that's a really good, a good point. Thank you. Eleanor.
Thanks. It's maybe a similar thing. I have sometimes had in the classroom people, you talked about sort of responding to prejudicial situations, and sometimes I'm not sure whether to respond or whether it makes it worse. Like there's sometimes things where people, I think, are teasing someone else about their accent or something like that. But it happens quite quickly and maybe quite quietly. And so I'm torn between shutting it down and saying that's not acceptable, and on the other hand, drawing attention to it, which might be more embarrassing for the person who's already been shamed. Do you have any ideas there?
Yes, I would definitely. I've got a slide on this in a little while as well, which would be quite useful. So I always look at this from the point of view of when something happens like that you've just described, we often spend time addressing the person who was the target, so whoever was the target of the racism. And we do need to speak with that person and make sure they're okay and, find out how they're feeling, etc. But I think we need to do equal work because sometimes we have a situation where we say, are you okay? They're being silly. They shouldn't have said that. Are you all right? Etc. etc. But I think we need to say, right, this other person who has kind of delivered the comment or tried to imitate the accent or whatever, they need equal teacher time and equal kind of like, space to be able to say, in privately is the ideal thing to do because we know often with an audience, children will try and, act out and whatnot. But when it's the teacher and the student one-to-one, I think you will get obviously a different side to them. And I think that it needs to be a case of, no, I'm not going to go and tell the person that you were just kidding or it was just a joke or whatever, because if that person has perceived it as racism and if they're upset and if you've perceived it as racism, then it's racism. And the person needs to understand the kind of gravity of the situation, because often we spend a lot of time, I feel, as teachers, looking after the person who's been the target and kind of saying, are you okay, blah, blah, blah. But I actually think what we need to do is say, no, and there are options. I've got some options on this slide as well. I'm going to show you in a bit for how you might choose to go forward with that, because there's kind of restorative, conversations that can have, and that might not be the thing that would be right for your school, but there are a number of things you can do. You could bring the two back together and have a conversation. But I would think that, I understand what you mean about making it worse, but I actually think that is just the uncomfortable feeling that you might be having when you're tackling the racism, because tackling racism is awkward and it's uncomfortable. I think it does get easier, but when you say, I don't want to make it worse, I think initially it does upset everything and it kind of exposes everything. But I think long term, it is definitely the right thing to do, isn't it? Because it means it happens again or something bigger happens that is similar. You can say, no, I've already closed this down before. We are not. And those words you used, Eleanor, were perfect, just to say, this is not acceptable. And it's that clear message to children who are still understanding social intelligence, etc., That is not acceptable. It's clear, it's unequivocal, and it is awkward and it is upsetting. But I think if we can teach our students that, obviously we need to teach them the subjects, but I think what they need to leave school with is a really deep sense of how we treat each other, isn't it, really? But that's brilliant. Thank you for those questions. I really appreciate that. Okay, so I tell you what we'll do. Instead of going into the breakout room, I tell you what we'll do. We will have a quick 5-minute break just to let people kind of, grab a drink or have a stretch of legs, etc., etc. And we'll come back in about 5 minutes. And then we'll carry on then. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm still here as well if anybody wants to ask questions, etc.
Hi, Fiona. It's Beth again.
Hi, Beth. Hi.
Hi. I met the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation briefly at WITS a few Saturdays ago, and they said for 1 week they were going to try meet schools in their assemblies. I just wondered, is that still happening? Do you know, perhaps? Because I gave my number to one of the gentlemen and was hoping.
Hi,
Sorry.
Beth. This is Ratabile. I'm from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. We are currently conducting anti-racism school assemblies. We had a sign-up sheet where schools were able to sign up and book a slot for this week. So far, we've conducted about 5 assemblies. But even outside of this week, this Action Week, Anti-Racism Week, we are available and open to hosting the assemblies. So you can just contact me on my email address. I'll pop it into the chat box.
And that'll be great.
No problem.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. Okay, what about 25 minutes left? And I think what we'll do now is move on to the section which is about recognising and reporting racism. So I think that although it's an obvious point, the first thing we need to do is to understand what racism is, so that when we do see it, we can recognise, you know, that it's happening. And I think most of us throughout the discussions we've had today have kind of given examples of, I think, racism when sometimes it's not always obvious racism. And I think that's the hardest one to be able to identify. And sometimes teachers kind of have to prove almost to a student, you know, I do know what you were doing was, you know, unkind and it was unacceptable. And there's sometimes the student can be really good at saying, oh, but I was just this or I was just that. But we know, don't we, intrinsically, we kind of think, well, we do understand that, you know, it wasn't nice what you did. And it can be name calling, it can be spreading rumors or gossip about somebody who that it might draw on stereotypes about their ethnicity, or it could be, I suppose, physical behavior, you know, like pushing, kicking, etc., intimidating somebody. There's a whole host of things, you know, the list is endless. Even at school, maybe not letting someone join in with the group work or the conversations because of their ethnicity or possibly their perceived ethnicity. It could be that somebody's damaging somebody's property. It could be stealing, motivated by, you know, a prejudice against somebody's ethnicity. And I think that what is really important and what's really key is that if the person who is being targeted perceives that it is a racial kind of target, then that's when it's racism. So it doesn't just have to be that, you know, say if somebody said, well, I didn't mean it to be racist. If the person who is the target perceives it to be racism, then it's racism. Okay, as long as it kind of fits that definition. So in terms of the definition, let's have a look. I'll share my screen. So racism, we define this at Red Card as treating somebody unfairly or unkind or different because of their race or culture or religion or nationality. So they're the four things that we define racism as. And it's treating somebody differently because of one of those four parts of their identity. Okay, so once you've recognized something is racist, and we've got some scenarios here which we could talk through to kind of think, right, and we've had scenarios that you've already brought up, so I think we've kind of done a little bit of this already. If we thought about this happening in our school, what would we say? How would we deal with it? Because through practice we can get better. So if we took this one, because this one's probably the most different to the ones that we've spoken about already. So a parent complains about an up-and-coming diversity week. They say that they don't understand why it's necessary, as they thought that all lives mattered. Okay, so how would you respond? Think about the target. So who is this comment being targeted at? Think about the consequences for the perpetrator. So in this case, the parent's the perpetrator. Evidence collection. How would you collect evidence around this? A reporting procedure, if you have one in school, and taking wider action. So what that might look like, there's a whole host of things here to think about, isn't there? Does anybody have anything kind of initially that springs to mind? This is quite a tough one because it's obviously a parent. When we're dealing with children, then we kind of think that's within our remit to be able to educate them and teach them. But when it's a parent, what would you do if this happened to you? How would you respond? Does anyone have any ideas?
I think it goes a bit back to the issue of raising awareness, and it becomes very much difficult in a sense of now when it is a parent. So I think as a teacher, it would be very much advisable to speak to the parent, educate the parent further in terms of what diversity means, and hopefully once they've understood what it is, and then explain to them like the importance, right? And how, and basically also the purpose. But I think also perhaps maybe in a more, I don't want to say in a way that's child friendly, but in a more practical way so that they can understand better what it is. I think I'll probably just give a nice phone call or perhaps even call the parent for tea or supper or something and just explain to them further. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a really good idea because if you just give somebody a bit of time, 10, 15 minutes, if it's a phone call and welcome them into school or something like that, I think that suddenly it's the understanding that maybe they thought, I don't know, what did they think it was about? But if we kind of thinking, well, this is about just being kinder and everybody having an understanding of each other, it would be bizarre really for somebody, especially a parent, not to want to have that for their own child, So I think that's a really good, maybe there's been, like, as you say, they haven't understood what's actually being, what's going on in Diversity Week. It's perception, isn't it, versus reality. So I think that's really good. Thank you, Lorato. Claude, you've got your hand up.
Hi, yeah, I'm thinking about the language that they've used to communicate with you.
Yeah.
If they're starting to phrase things like all lives matter, there's an agenda to that discussion that you might need to be aware of, and it
Yeah.
might be useful to indicate that, well, that's precisely why we need a diversity week, but that'll only be useful to you. It's not going to be useful to them. I think I would engage. I'm very happy to engage with somebody who's asking a genuine question and gives us the opportunity to exchange thinking around this. But that all lives mattered, I think, is a bit of a trigger, and it's aimed to get a response from us. And buying into that response just confirms the bias that's already there in my head.
Yeah.
I'd be inclined to want to have a discussion with them, but it would be from the point of view that we're very convinced that it's the right thing to do. And if I would get to a stage, not too slowly, that if you're not seeing the value of this, if you really feel the way that you do, maybe we're a school with the wrong set of values for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair assessment. And I think that you've hit really on the point there about all lives mattered. There's definitely a kind of almost political loaded statement there, isn't there, by that parent? I think you've got that exactly right, Claude. And I think that they have really missed the point there, that what we're trying to do in Diversity Week is make opportunities possible by understanding, so that marginalized groups are not marginalized. And by that parent saying all lives mattered is suggesting that there is an equal playing field to begin with, which we know there isn't. So we are kind of, I suppose, trying to explain that if they really don't understand this kind of like all lives matter, why that's kind of so kind of loaded, that they're suggesting that everything is just equal, when we know the world is full of inequalities. And really it's just about addressing those and making a point of celebrating different cultures. But I agree. I think if you knew the parent, that would help you decide the best way, because obviously you would know your parents and you would know, because there's often, I find, in a school, there's often one parent who just likes to be inflammatory sometimes, who kind of likes to challenge, what's going on. And to be honest, if possible, I think you're best getting that person on one of your focus groups, because they have a really good, strong voice, I think probably if they were open to channeling it, it's often better to have them on your side than on the other, on the opposite side, if you like. So they can become an advocate. I've seen that happen. It is possible, but it just depends on the person, doesn't it? So it's very much down to who it is that's kind of like, in the scenario. But yeah, that's really useful. Thank you, Claude. Eleanor.
Yeah, I think what's useful is, that when I hear a parent like that, I just want to say, oh, for goodness sake, for crying in a bucket, and that's not going to help. So I think it's really useful to say to myself the things that you were saying. What is it about the shallowness of coming back with a response like, oh, but all lives matter. So, and to write it down in a calm frame of mind when I haven't got the parent opposite me, and to sort of have those ideas written down so that I can just pull them out somewhere when I'm just seeing red and I'm not able to
Absolutely.
speak to them calmly. To
Yeah.
prepare something, but to think about what kind of response would be good.
Yeah.
So that's useful.
I think that's a really good point, because we have got it's almost like you knew what this next slide was going to be, Eleanor, because this is something I really wanted to share with you. This is the Effective Challenge Toolkit, because I really sometimes get stuck for words when I'm caught in that moment and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I know this is wrong. I know I want to challenge it, but what's the least inflammatory thing? Because you don't want to come back at something inflammatory with more inflammation, because that's just going to get worse and worse. So we kind of think if we go about it with a bit of kind of grace and a bit of it's often the case they might expect a bit of confrontation back, maybe. So if we give them a little bit of, well, we will really love to talk to you about this, or offer some kind of like time to go through it, you probably find they'll say, oh no, I've got to go to work, or, and it's sometimes that it's just a very shallow throwaway comment that they just fancied, getting somebody's back up, etc. But yeah, I think that these are some options which are available to you. So rephrase, if you hear somebody saying something like that, you can kind of repeat what's said, but maybe challenge the offensive bit, and say, well, what do you mean? All lives do matter, but do you kind of understand maybe the point of kind of the diversity week, and happily explain that to you, which is kind of putting the question in with it as well. So yeah, I suppose you might kind of say to the person, what makes you think that we don't think all lives matter, and give it as a question back to them. This is the one I struggle with. This is in form. It's the one where you kind of need all of your data and your statistics to kind of come back at the person. But it is often the case as you kind of need a pre-rehearsed piece of information in your mind to do that. So it can be worth researching something for that. In the UK, we do have people who are really very prejudiced against asylum seekers, and they believe sometimes that the asylum seekers who come to the UK take all the benefits money from the government, and they, get lots of money for just coming to the UK and, support financially. When the bit of information I have remembered about this is that asylum seekers in the UK, they get £6.52 per day as a family of 4 to live on. And that's £6.52 a day. That's for everything: clothes, meals, heating, lighting, everything, whatever it is they've got to school equipment, shoes. And £6.52 a day is not anywhere near, enough to cover costs for. And that's kind of one thing I have remembered, which I kind of, because there's a lot of discussion at the minute in the UK about immigration and asylum seekers and boats and all kinds of things. So yeah, that I do remember that one. This is the one that Beth, you were talking about before. This is the direct challenge, where you clearly state that is not acceptable. And you could say that to child or a parent, depending if you thought it was appropriate. I think where the person says all lives matter, that possibly isn't the right response. If they'd said something really like racially, like a racial slur or something, you could say, look, you know, that's not acceptable. Indirect challenge, so you could report the person to, you know, if it was a child and you wanted to say, report it to their pastoral leader or somebody else like who was, you know, connected with that child, if the child is already under supervision for, you know, having had childhood traumas, you might not think it's appropriate at that point for you to challenge that child. You might think it's better dealt with by going through, you know, another grown-up who has a you know, already system in place with that child to support them. Or if you feel, and please never put your own personal safety at risk, or your emotional safety either, that is paramount. If you feel appropriate, you can withdraw. And that includes if you, for example, are on a WhatsApp group or you have got, you know, an email from somebody, a parent, or and it's inappropriate. Do not feel the need to reply. You can obviously take that and do something else, you know, an indirect challenge, etc. But it's your prerogative to withdraw. There's so many WhatsApp groups now as well that people sometimes, if they're in a friendship group, they sometimes put things on and you kind of think, that's not inappropriate, but you don't want to challenge them. So you can withdraw, just take yourself out of the group, because that's certainly something you can do. Okay, so just keeping an eye on the time. If we do have a racist incident in school, we've kind of got the opportunity to look at it through these different lenses. So perpetrator, victim, and bystander. So the person who was doing the kind of the negative behavior, we can actually, as I said before, spend a bit of time with them and interview them, you know, just in a kind of like, look, I'm just here. I'm not kind of, you know, the PC police, or you know, I'm not, and explain to them, you're just trying to get an idea of their version of events, of the incident. Because it could be that they have a lack of understanding. It could be that they don't realize how traumatic it can be for somebody to receive racism. And it gives you the opportunity to explain why the behavior is wrong. And when, as I say, we're not there to shame people. We do not, because that doesn't help people to change their behavior. We kind of know that, don't we? And seek to understand that they know why what they've done is wrong. I think that's really important. And as you've done today, Beth, you know, you got an apology there from that perpetrator. So that was a classic kind of example there. It was really good. For the victim, again, don't feel that this is kind of an obvious thing. I think it's worth saying to the victim, you know, the behavior, what you received there is wrong, and explain why it's wrong, because it will help them to understand, because they might think the person's being told off for something different, but it's important, isn't it, to kind of take that time to explain, and encourage them to come forward if something like that happens again. And also explain to the victim how the incident is going to be dealt with. So say to the victim, we have spoken to X, and, you know, don't think it's just going to be, you know, brushed under the carpet, because it's not. If anybody's witness to the incident, we call those bystanders. Can you make sure as well that separately you can get those people together and say, what you saw there was wrong, and you might not know what's been done as a consequence, but I want you to understand that things are being done and conversations are being had, because what you saw there was unacceptable. They don't need to know the details. They don't need to know the names of, you know, whoever it is you're dealing with, but they can be informed, you know, that if they saw anything, that they wanted to express how they felt about it, if they felt, you know, that you are there to support the bystanders as well. So in terms of recognizing and reporting, we've kind of talked about recognizing and helping the students recognize as well what's actually racism. So I'm going to show you in a minute our education hub, which is all of our resources online, which are already made into lessons so that you can just easily pick them out and kind of have them as ready-made. In your school, you may have a kind of reporting system. In the UK, we have been in the last 10 years in a space where government do not require racist incidents to be reported, which is totally bizarre. But means the government will probably claim that we don't have any racist incidents because there's no data on it, so it doesn't exist, which obviously it does. Yeah, this is kind of like a very individual school thing, whether or not we have a system for reporting. Even though the government might not require you to report, I would still suggest that as an organisation, you have an agreed procedure for recording and reporting, so that you can have an idea of what's happening in your school. We've just spoken about investigation, the perpetrator, bystander, victim, the model there that you can use, whether you've got a safeguarding expert or a safeguarding lead in your school. The data that you collect for your school will help you to understand where maybe things are happening in more age groups than others, or whether certain groups of students need to have some training or workshops, or some lessons from the Education Hub. And again, whether or not you've got support in terms of an outside agency, well, such as, Red Card, we obviously do school workshops, etc. It can be that you get support from outside and that you don't necessarily have to do everything yourself. Restorative intervention, these are alternatives to excluding the student, and consider maybe how that student's wound up saying those things in the first place. In terms of the Education Hub, I'm skipping through this really quickly now because we're at almost the end. We have got this website here, www.theredcardhub.org, and it's entirely free. There are about 60 lessons on there, and they are categorized in topics. The topic that is anti-racism is probably where I would suggest that maybe you would start if you've not used the hub before. So there are about 30 lessons on the anti-racism section, and there's all sorts of like 15-minute really short activities. There are longer activities, there are kind of projects which people might want to do as a longer thing. Most of my time during the week is spent looking after the Education Hub. So that's kind of like my main project. So if there's anything on there which you feel like you would love to try or pilot, or there's anything I can help you with, then absolutely please do, please do shout out. And I know that my email address is in the chat box there. I'll put it in the chat box just one more time in case people have missed it further up the thread. And I will put, now when you go onto the Red Card Education Hub, you will be asked for like an email and a password. You just create your own password. So you just put your email address in, your own password, and then you'll be good to go. Okay, 2 people got their hands up. I'm going to share the slides with everyone as well. So shall I try and do that on here, or shall I send that? Let's have a right. Ratability, should I try and send that through you, or should I try and put them on here?
You can send it to me and I will forward it to everyone that was part of this.
Brilliant. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Right, Claude, you had your hand up.
I think it was from earlier. I think
Oh,
he's just
was
put
it?
it.
Oh,
Muted,
sorry.
sorry.
Right, thank you. Thank you. Lorato.
So regarding to the 2 slides that we've just seen, in terms of the perpetrator, the victim, and also the other slide in terms of the action that you take, the referral, the record, and all of that, I just wanted to find out, in a case of, especially now, the schooling environment, and I believe we all are aware and we know how children are, it's a monkey see, monkey do. In a case whereby both the children, both of them are victims, and both of them are perpetrators, So a quick scenario, one child says, oh, you're so happy about your straight hair, you think you're better than everyone, and you're saying I'm ugly because I'm black, but I can't stand in the sun longer than you, stuff like that. And then now it's an issue now that the one reports it, and then the teacher's like, okay, why would you say that? And the other says, no, but he said my skin is like this. And says, but no, he said my hair is like this, Do you then would still advise that you could still follow the perpetrator and victim procedure, especially the one you shared in the slide, in the terms of treat both the kids as victims and both the kids as perpetrators? Or could there be another angle in tackling the issue, because now both are guilty and both are the victims?
I think that's a really good question. And I think with children and the way that they interact, sometimes these things do happen in that way, don't they? I would say that children can swap roles. So sometimes they might be the perpetrator, sometimes they might be the bystander, sometimes they might be the victim. And I would say I would treat those incidents as, certainly in one case you've described there, the child was the victim, and another where they were the perpetrator, which can happen, I think, sometimes with retaliation as well. And yeah, it would be unpicking it all, wouldn't it? And kind of like learning exactly what was happening and what you see. The thing about somebody making a racist comment or racist behavior is, even if they don't think it's racist, if we know that it's a racist incident and the person receiving it considers it to be racist, then it's racist, because sometimes it might be unintentional racism. And I think that the majority of people on the planet are generally probably quite nice. And I think there are a small group of people who definitely are, racist, who are genuinely, like, hopefully a small group of people who are just setting out to be racist and absolutely vile and horrible. And I think a lot of the time we're dealing with children who are socially just learning to be, as I said before, social newborns. And I think we have to be able to unpick. That sounds like a really complicated kind of interaction, but I think to be able to unpick it and say, right, you were wrong in this part and you were wrong in this part. We can't go on like this. It's not acceptable. We've both been wrong. We've both been victims. It's all really mixed up. But to understand what it is that's hurtful on both sides, so that going forward, we don't have people hurt again, because we don't want anybody to feel hurt. We want people to be at school so that they can learn and so that they have an environment they feel safe in. So yeah, it's definitely a really good example and a really good question, but I think it would all need to be unpicked, and you would have to say, you were this and that point, but then you became the victim, or, and I think it's children are definitely able to follow it. I definitely think that would be something they could understand, especially if it was kind of explained, and then they understand kind of the dynamics of what's happened as well, which is also learning. It's useful learning, isn't it? But thank you. I hope that helped a little bit, Lorato. Marianne.
It really did. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Marianne, is your...
Yeah, there we go. Hi, everyone. Hi, Fiona. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I hope what I'm going to say is not going to become a trigger, but it's more a genuine question. So I think in South Africa, in our context, because of living in an apartheid era, people being under that, there can be the perception that racism can only be targeted against Black people, let's say. That's why I said it might sound like a trigger, but it's, let me explain myself. So I live in my home, I've got multiracial, my own home is multiracial. I've got white children and I've got Black children. And we've had discussions where, for example, my daughter Gugu, she will say it's okay for a Black person, when they're speaking to another Black person, to use the N-word. but it wouldn't be okay for a white person to use the N word because that would be perceived as racist. And my teaching to her is, I don't care who uses what word. It's not because of your color of your skin that you should be using any form of language that somebody else could take an offense to. So, yeah. So, for example, your little question on All Lives Matter, I think from a South African context, perhaps where I heard it, came from the campaign of Black Lives Matter, and then people's retaliation was All Lives Matter. And I suppose I sort of thought, yes, that's true. It's not just because of your color of your skin that a certain color of skin lives matter. All lives do matter. And we need to teach children the value of understanding people for who people are, and they like different cultures, different religions, celebrate the diversity in a school, and like embrace that it's not just about one race or another, but that lives matter, and how do we show that lives matter? So yeah, I don't know. I think as a South African, you know, I think we struggle with being scared to open our mouths because we could be accused of racism just because of the color of our skin. And so quite often as a teacher, you tread lightly. So a way I would tread lightly, for example, is if there's an issue of hair with a black child, I will ask my black colleague to speak to that child. Or if there's an issue around Ramadan with a Muslim child, I won't speak into that situation because I will say, okay, I think we need you to speak to the Muslim teacher. We're fortunate that we have a very diverse school, but it's the way I tread lightly. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know if...
I think they are really interesting points, Marianne, and I really appreciate you sharing those with us. I completely agree on your first point. My view personally is that I don't really want to hear anybody using the N-word, whether you know, regardless of, you know, the color of your skin. And white people can find it offensive. I don't say it in training. I don't ever put it out on the board when I'm doing any classroom work. I would just refer to it as the N-word, as you did. I've had people who I've had discussions with in, you know, training like this when they haven't said the N-word and they've said the full word, and it's upset people in the group, and people have been so triggered that they've left the group. So I think it has a really huge impact sometimes that maybe, you know, is only understood by a few people. By the way, if anybody needs to go, please do, because we're stopping on here and we're running over time a bit. But if people do need to go, can I just say a huge thanks to all of you for coming, and, you know, get in touch with anything if there's anything that I can help you with in future. But yes, I'll just stay on because I don't have another meeting just now, so I'm happy just to stay on and continue if people want to stay on. So yes, in terms of the N-word, I completely agree. We have, I don't know if you have this in South Africa, but some children in schools these days in the UK will say that they're allowed to say the N-word because their friend who's black has given them an N-word pass. And what that means is it's like an imaginary thing. It's not a real pass. It's just an imaginary concept where the black child has apparently given permission for the non-black child to say the N-word, like in full, and they'll say, oh, it's all right, I've got the N-word pass. It's like, hang on, you think another child's given you permission to break the law, and that's you're accepting that that's okay. So if a police officer comes along and says, well, you're not really allowed to say that, you can say, oh, it's all right, my friend said I could say it. Almost, I'm like saying it's all right, my friend said I could rob the bank, you know. So the N-word pass and people of certain color being allowed to say it, and then white people. I agree. I don't think anybody should use the N-word. It's got such an offensive history. It's offensive to so many people. And I think that it's just, you know, you hear it in music sometimes, because I think that, you know, hip hop artists in the 80s tried to reclaim the word and take away that sting that, you know, that the history of the word has. I don't think it's quite worked. I think you still hear artists using it now. For example, there's artists who currently write music now, you know, pop music, they still use the N-word. And I don't think that it sounds okay personally, but I think it's kind of it just doesn't sound right to me, in whether it's in a song or not. But I guess, you know, people are trying to reclaim the word, and that's why they say they're using it in the music. In terms of your other points,
What I was going to say with that, I think the difficulty comes in if a white child or an Indian child hears a black child saying it to a black child and they're okay with it, and then they join in the group and they suddenly use the word, and then suddenly it's racist for them. And I
Yeah.
think that's where I'm like, if there's a word that is racist, it's that rule applies to everyone. You can't say it's okay for you to say it, but not somebody else. And
Yes.
there's quite a lot of debate around this. No, it is okay for two black children to say it to each other, but no white child or Indian child can use that word, because then they're being racist. And that's where the mixed messages that are put out there that I struggle with.
Yeah, I think so. And I think having a policy in a school could be a way around it, and just say, you know, have a policy, but share the policy with the pupils so they understand, you know, and share the policy with staff and parents. It depends how you think that's going to be received. We've got colleagues over in Boston in America, and they said they wouldn't dare tell people what to say and what not to say. You know, in terms of the communities around the schools there, because they have a totally different viewpoint on it. To say what we say in the UK, we can say to teachers and schools and communities, the N-word's really offensive. It's not something we want you to use. But our colleagues in Boston have said we wouldn't dare say that, because there's just not quite it. So yeah, I think you need to know your own school environment, don't you, and know what's going to work for you. But it feels very much as though we're all on a journey. I'm going to finish in a minute, because I realize that you know, you're load shedding and I don't want us to be cut off abruptly. But certainly everybody's on a journey, you know, and the Black Lives Matter movement that kind of became really prevalent again in 2020, you know, it kind of rose to the surface again. It certainly has triggered off these kind of sound bites where people say, oh, but all lives matter. And yes, all lives do matter, but it is a case of that understanding of we know that historically people have been marginalized, whether it's through, you know, apartheid or slavery or whatever it may be. And that has still got repercussions for people and from certain cultures today. So what we're trying to say is, when George Floyd was murdered in 2020, would that have happened to somebody who was not Black? The records, the statistics from the police in the UK and in America show that stop and search happens far more if you're Black. It's a crazy percentage higher if you're Black, the stop and search, than if you are white. So that's kind of, I think, what we're getting at when we say Black Lives Matter, is that sometimes we feel as if Black people are treated as if Black lives don't matter. So it's a short phrase, but there's so much to understand about it, isn't there? I could talk with you for ages. You have been such good company, all of you, and really, really enjoyed all of your kind of comments and discussion, because it's really, really good to hear what's happening, you know, in your environments and your organizations. Please reach out if you have anything else. I will definitely send the slides over. And yeah, there's our email addresses in the chat box. I have got, if you have just one further moment, I always get into trouble for not sharing this when I get back into the office. We've got a little very quick kind of like I can't remember what you call it. What do you call it? Like a evaluation. And I always forget to ask people to do this. If you have like a mobile phone or a tablet, if you open your camera and just hold it over the QR code, it should take you to a form. It's a really quick form. If you could fill it in, that would be great. And if you've got any further questions or anything, just please feel free to email them to me, because it's great to engage with all of you. And enormous thanks. Oh, I'll tell you what, I'll send the link.
But I'm sure you'll also be able to access it from the slides once they're sent. Promise they'll be sent by
Oh,
early next.
yes. Yes, good point.
Just a huge thank you once again, Fiona. I think
Thank
really
you.
the insights and training that you provided today have really honed in on some of the key practices and tools that we can really use to equip ourselves in making sure that we have truly diverse and inclusive classrooms, especially in a period like this where a lot of racism, it's a pre-election season. We know that racism and discrimination is on the rise. And I think these are really useful tools that you have really equipped us with. I hope that we're able to continue this session throughout the year, just so that we're able to build on some of the things that you have shared with us today. I just want to remind everyone that's here that as part of Anti-Racism Week, there are a number of activations that are planned, and you can just find out on our social media what's planned and what you can participate in if you're willing to. And yeah, just once again, thank you so much for the interactiveness. I'm sure everyone enjoyed the session, just from all of the comments and all of the expertise that have been shared. So thank you once again for your participation, and I hope you guys all have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Bye now.